pales in comparison, Mr. Speaker, to what happened 100 years ago today. In recent years, after this administration blindly supported what it called, and others in North Africa and the Middle East called, an Arab Spring, we've come to find out what many of us suspected even at the time and said was likely to be more of a devastating winter than an Arab Spring. It has seen the fall of government in Libya. It has seen the chaos arise in many parts of Libya. It has seen terrorists take control of parts of Libya. It has seen the fall of the government in Algeria, Tunisia, and the takeover by radical Islam. And I was amazed at the ignorance in many in the mainstream media when I said back at the time that what the radical Islamists, what the Muslim Brotherhood was seeking to recreate was the beginning of the Ottoman Empire, and that in its ignorance, our executive branch, this administration here in the U.S., actually helped jumpstart what the Muslim Brothers are hoping will be the new Ottoman Empire. I was surprised how many reporters asked, what did I mean by Ottoman Empire? They had not had the kind of education that I was fortunate to have in public schools in East Texas, public school in the way of a University of Texas A&M, and then law school at Baylor. So they didn't know what the Ottoman Empire was. Hopefully they did some research. Many of us did not realize that the date 9/11, when the worst attack on America occurred, that it also marked the anniversary of the worst defeat that the Islamic Caliphate ever suffered in history. That was the devastating defeat to the Caliphate. The radical Islamic Caliphate had made it all the way to Vienna, laid siege upon Vienna, and on 9/11, 1683, the radical Islamic Caliphate suffered its worst defeat in history. And amazingly, that was the date that Osama bin Laden and the mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, currently in Guantanamo, hopefully will stay there until his death. That's the date they chose to inflict the worst attack in American history. To many people, dates mean things. My anniversary means a lot. I've never forgotten one. Our birthdays mean a lot to most Westerners. Some of us begin to try to forget them, but major dates in Caliphate history, a great deal to radical Islamists. There's an article today written by Dr. Sebastian Gorka, and I would like to read this in for the record. He does a good job of encapsulating an issue today. Dr. Gorka says, 100 years ago today, the last Caliph, or emperor of Islam, declared the last jihad against the infidel. And today, for the first time ever, the National Cathedral in the nation's capital will host Muslim prayers. Most Americans will have no idea that as part of World War I, the then Caliph of the Ottoman Empire declared a holy war against infidels, as was his right within Sharia law and Islamic theology. You can read the full fatwa. In that fatwa, there actually was a typo in the original. It was provided on this day in 1914, but they had a typo saying it was 1915. The article says that that statement by the last sitting head of what was the theocratic empire of Islam was the catalyst which led to the religiously fueled genocide against Christian Armenians and Assyrians. And that is what is pictured. It actually represents a photograph that was taken of young Armenian Christian girls who were kidnapped, stripped naked, raped, and then crucified on crosses as far as the eye could see. This article points out the Episcopal Church leaders who agreed to host Muslim prayers inside the Washington Cathedral probably have no idea what happened a century ago in Asia Minor, or that there even was a caliph in office at the beginning of the 20th century. However, we can rest assured that the co-organizers do, for they include the Council on Islamic Relations, CARE, the Islamic Society of North America, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and the Al-Dulles Area Muslims Society, or ADAMS Center. Both CARE and ISNA will be fully aware of the significance of November 14th, seeing as both organizations were declared by a federal court to be unindicted co-conspirators of Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood terror group, in the largest terrorist financing trial in U.S. history. Those Muslims who have a supremacist understanding of their religion, such as members of Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood, which was recently declared an illegal terrorist organization in the country where it was founded, Egypt, have a special regard for historic dates and anniversaries. The article goes on that it is, of course, no accident 9/11 attacks, the worst terror attacks in world history, occurred exactly to the day in 1683 when the Islamic Ottoman forces were defeated outside the city walls of Vienna, the deepest the Islamic Caliphate's forces made it in to the heart of the Christian West. There is nothing inherently wrong with interfaith initiatives as long as they start from the same place, a mutual respect for the belief system of the other and their inherent dignity as humans created by God. When one party acts in bad faith based upon its ideological commitment to see other faiths destroyed or subjected, then the event runs the risk of becoming a propaganda coup for the extremists and their followers. The fact that this event is occurring just as ancient Christian communities are being destroyed in the Middle East and, quote, non-believers, unquote, are being actually crucified by ISIS jihadists makes it all the more egregious. We know that the Episcopal Church is in trouble with more conservative believers leaving in great numbers and the remaining adherents not exactly outdoing their Catholic cousins in terms of reproducing the next generation of believers. The author goes on to say, but I doubt they also understand the finer points of jihadist doctrine, one of which is that if a place of worship is used by Muslims for their prayers, that territory subsequently becomes part of Dar al-Islam, sacred Muslim land, forever. That author was Sebastian Gorka, Ph.D., and he is the Major General Matthew C. Horner Distinguished Chair of Military Theory at the Marine Corps University and National Security and Foreign Affairs Editor at Breitbart.com. So, Mr. Speaker, it is an important day, and since the prosecution referred to in this article was actually the Holy Land Foundation trial, criminal trial in United States Federal District Court in Dallas, Texas, and since I have done a great deal of reading and looking into the issues involved in that case, and I'm aware of the massive number of counts of conviction, and also have read the pleadings, some of the pleadings in the case in which the Islamic Society of North America and the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR and ISNA, were named as co-conspirators in that prosecution, that they were contributors and part of funding terrorism. They were not named as indicted co-conspirators, but they were named as co-conspirators. And CAIR and ISNA were among parties that filed pleadings in federal district court demanding that their names be eliminated from the pleadings. And yet, after the federal judge in Dallas reviewed all of the information, the evidence before him, he declared that actually there was plenty of evidence to support the fact that CAIR and ISNA, that have such cozy relations with this administration now, that those two entities are among those who are plenty of evidence to support that they are co-conspirators in supplying, financing terrorism. Well, that conviction occurred in late 2008, or those convictions, and from some who have been involved in that effort, their understanding was that if the Bush administration Justice Department, after years of investigation and the effort at prosecution, if they got convictions, then the intention was to come back, and especially since the courts had said there's plenty of evidence to support that these named co-conspirators were co-conspirators, then they would come back and actually indict them, prosecute them, and those parties were not satisfied, though, with the judgment of the Dallas federal court, so they appealed the ruling that there was plenty of evidence to support CAIR and ISNA being co-conspirators, and Imam Majid, that is their part of the prayer effort at National Cathedral today, that they wanted their names eliminated. The federal judge in Dallas would not do that, so they appealed to the Court of Appeals, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And after the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals reviewed the record, all the evidence, the information, then they stated even more plainly and directly than the federal district court did, yes, there really was plenty of evidence to support that they were co-conspirators and that the names should not be struck, they should not be kept private. And the thinking was that, any administration, of course, will understand once a federal district court and a court of appeals finds there's plenty of evidence to support that CAIR and ISNA are co-conspirators in helping terrorism around the world, that surely they would not end up being cozy with any American administration. That would be the common sense, you would think. There's plenty of common sense back where I come from, but you get to Washington and it's not common sense, it's just sense. And it is rather a shame that organizations who were said by federal court system to have plenty of evidence to show that they are co-conspirators in radical Islamic effort at terrorism, that they would have such an open ear at the White House. As in recent years, there was a 2-day seminar that was going to take place out at Langley. And because I know one of the instructors very well, he's made a career out of studying radical Islam. He used to provide briefings, do research, provide advice to the Joint Chiefs of Staff of our military about radical Islam. Well, he was one of them. Well, that rather upset what the federal courts have said. Evidence indicates were front groups for the Muslim Brotherhood, were suppliers, helpers in terrorism. They got upset that he was going to be out there and be part of teaching the seminar. So they burned up the phone line to the White House. The White House canceled the seminar. And it was CARE that had an ongoing partnership they developed with the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I was surprised it took so long after the FBI had spent a couple of decades investigating what ultimately we understood was the Muslim Brotherhood. It was surprising that with federal courts saying there's plenty of evidence to show that they're complicit as supplying terrorism, funding, helping with terrorism. I was surprised that the FBI decided with all that evidence they furnished the prosecutors that they ended up turning around and making CARE their partner. So I was surprised that the letter took so long from the FBI eventually to the leaders of CARE saying that in view of evidence, in essence, there in the Holy Land Foundation trial, we need to suspend our partnership in the outreach program that the FBI had to them. When I was questioning the immediate previous director of the FBI, Director Mueller, about the Tsarnaevs and the lack of investigation into their background, even after the Russians warned this administration twice. The first time, and apparently the Russians were surprised we didn't do anything with the knowledge they had that Tsarnaev had been radicalized and would likely kill people here. They warned a second time and had to be totally shocked. And the best investigation included talking to Tsarnaev himself and to his mom. There may have been some other peripheral things. But as I questioned the director of the FBI, you guys didn't even go out to their mosque to ask questions to help you determine whether Tsarnaev had been radicalized. And in essence, he ended up saying, we did go to the mosque. When he gave the answer, I didn't hear the little add-on he gave until my staff replayed it, but the little add-on he gave after we did go out to the mosques, those mosques, he added in our outreach program. So just as I suspected, the FBI didn't go out and investigate. Michelle Bachmann, Lynn Westmoreland reviewed some of the materials. Trent Franks looked at some of the materials. But we were concerned because CARE, this named co-conspirator in supplying and helping terrorism as a front group for the Muslim Brotherhood, we were surprised that CARE had such powerful inroads into the FBI, enough to the point that they could demand to have the training materials for the FBI reviewed and had them purged of things that they, as apparently a front group for the Muslim Brotherhood, found offensive. They, as named co-conspirators in funding terrorism, they were offended. So, massive number of pages that radical Islamists might find offensive, that people who want to kill Americans might be offended by, were purged from our training materials. State Department apparently purged materials. Intelligence community purged materials. And as one intelligence officer told me, we have blinded ourselves of the ability to see our enemy. So, Mr. Speaker, it breaks my heart, grieves me deeply when innocent Muslims are maltreated, killed, tortured. It is a grievous violation of human rights. But in the same way, the things that have done and are growing and spreading in numbers never before seen in human history of Christians being persecuted around the world, as America basically remains silent. But today, being the 100th anniversary of the Caliph's public fatwa demanding murder, killing of Christians in 1914 by the last Islamic Caliph, also is the first day in our history when the National Cathedral, run by the Presbyterian Church, ceded to the named co-conspirators in funding terrorism's demands to have prayers today on this 100th anniversary of the fatwa that caused the death of countless Christians, especially Armenian Christians, as depicted in this blown-up photograph from a newspaper, as depicted in this drawing that we have blurred, depicting what was actually seen along the road as massive numbers of young Christian girls were raped and crucified. We don't want a holy war. No Christian should ever go to some kind of holy war. But for heaven's sake, when there is an international group that moderate Muslim leaders in the Middle East have said to me, the Muslim Brotherhood is your enemy. They've been behind every attack that's occurred onto America and Americans. They've been behind the killing of Americans all over the Middle East and the world. Why do you keep helping the Muslim Brotherhood? When the largest uprising in the history of the world occurred over a year ago in Egypt, when moderate Muslims, Christians, even the Coptic Christian Pope, secularists, over 30 million came to the streets of Egypt and said, we don't want radical Islam controlling our country. It was a day of historic proportions. Never before a crowd the size that gathered, even when 20 million came out or when the estimated 33 million came out. They demanded the same thing. It was not a military coup, as CNN and this administration tried to paint. It was the largest uprising in the history of the world in Egypt. And the Egyptians, instead of being called stupid, foolish by this administration and some media, they should have been congratulated. We should have rushed to their assistance. And instead, this administration said, unless you put the Muslim brother Morsi back in power, then we're not going to help you. The Apache helicopters that were coming, that you used to keep the Suez Canal open, that you used to fight terrorism in the Sinai that helps Israel, we're not going to send them. You're not going to be able to keep the Suez Canal and the Sinai terrorism down until you put back the Muslim Brother in charge. Many in the media made a big deal about the Christian churches being burned and about Jews and Christians being persecuted, tortured, and killed. And for some unbelievable reason, tried to blame it on those who ousted the Muslim Brothers. And anybody that will do any modicum of research in Egypt will understand it was the Muslim Brothers that burned the churches, that killed Christians and Jews there. It was not the government. It was not the military. The military, General al-Sisi, was doing everything they could to stop it. I talked to a former CIA operative in the Middle East last year who said he had talked to a guy who said Morsi, President Morsi, had tried to contract through him to have General al-Sisi murdered. I asked our embassy personnel if they had heard of anything like that. They said they had not. In our meeting with General al-Sisi, I asked him directly, did you have evidence when you arrested President Morsi that he was trying to hire someone to kill you? He beat around the bush twice and ultimately answered, yes, we did. And yet we even had Republicans go to Cairo and say, put back the Muslim Brothers. And I met the brilliant gentleman, Muslim, seemed to be a very fine man, that was put in charge of the committee to draft a new constitution, because the Constitution of the United States helped, and this administration helped Egypt to get, that led to the Muslim Brotherhood control of the country, had no provision for impeachment. So as Muslim Brother President Morsi began to usurp power, kind of in the same vein as Noriega and other dictators who get elected and then start grabbing power, he was doing it in Egypt. There was no provision for impeachment. There was nothing they could do except what they did: go to the street in the tens of millions, demand his, and in the largest uprising, cause the removal of an unconstitutionally acting president. And he was removed, thank goodness. I was thrilled earlier this year when I think it was over 90% of the Egyptian voters voted to ratify the new constitution for Egypt. I really wished that all of the American media could have grasped the significance of what happened. That Constitution actually included provisions that required the Egyptian government under the Constitution to rebuild and replace the churches or synagogues that had been damaged or destroyed by the Muslim Brotherhood. They felt so badly for what the Muslim Brotherhood had done to the Christians and Jews. They put it in their constitution that they had to be repaired and replaced. That should have been a big day for freedom, and most of the American media missed it entirely. Well, they're also missing today, and as the left often wants to do, maybe they want to vilify me, but you can't change. You can try to rewrite history, but you can't change what has happened in the past. And what happened 100 years ago today, the first day, November 14th, that the National Cathedral, run by the Presbyterian Church, has allowed Muslim prayers by named co-conspirators in the terrorist funding trial to come lead prayers in this Christian cathedral. I thank God that the massive majority of Muslims, including some of my Muslim friends in the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, they don't want radical Islamists controlling anything. They don't want to be at war with Americans. They don't want to kill Americans. Thank God for that. But it is sheer lunacy not to recognize how important anniversaries are to radical Islamists, to the Muslim Brotherhood, to those who would kill and persecute and wipe out Jews, and as they say, wipe the great Satan America off the map and the little Satan Israel off the map. It is lunacy not to recognize the way these radical Islamists feel. We can live at peace with moderate Muslims. When I visited Nigeria not long ago to mourn with the Africans, 23 mothers who had had their daughters kidnapped, brutalized every day, still in Boko Haram, radical Islamist control. It was a beautiful thing. Nigeria, until the radicals got involved, had Muslims and Christians living peacefully together. Meeting a government official, a devout Christian, who had in his wedding party one of his best friends in the world who was a Muslim. It's a thing of beauty to see people with different backgrounds and beliefs living at peace together. But until the American media, until the majority of Americans realize there really are radical Islamists that think that the fatwa that was declared by the last Islamic Caliph of the Ottoman Empire 100 years ago today was a great thing, then this country remains at great risk. It's bad enough that we have enemies publicly saying they want to wipe us off the map, destroy our freedom of worship, free speech, the freedoms we hold dear and love. But to be blind that they want to destroy us is negligence, reckless indifference that can cost a country's freedom. So, Mr. Speaker, today is a big day, and I hope Americans will wake up and understand the Muslim Brotherhood is not our friend. They want us all to be living, if we live at all, as Muslims, or to pay the fine that acknowledges that we are subjugating ourselves to radical Islam. People have got to wake up. The country is at risk. And Mr. Speaker, with prayerful regard to the masses of young Christians who were kidnapped, raped, crucified as a result of that fatwa issued 100 years ago today, I hope that we will not be so blind that we could allow this movement to continue to grow as it has grown and grown. Some say a good way to avoid destructive forces overtaking civilized society is to watch Israel. That Israel could be looked at as the world's miner's canary. As miners used to take canaries into the mine shafts, they knew that the canaries were more sensitive to poison gas, so if they saw a canary getting in trouble, falling, then they knew they better get out of the mine because it was very, very dangerous. When we see Israel being attacked, our best friend in the Middle East being attacked, when we see anti-Semitism, hatred for Jews, hatred for Israelis growing in Europe, of all places. I never thought that would happen again after Hitler, but it's growing again around Europe. It's growing on American campuses. These young, wonderful, brilliant students who've been miseducated to think they need to get involved in anti-Semitism on their campuses in America will hopefully wake up and realize they've been played by people that are not about freedom. It's time for America to wake up, because today, as an anniversary of what happened 100 years ago, is a really big deal for those who want to destroy our way of life and our lives if we're Christians. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Under this